Okay, dedication for all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael and for protection of all the armed forces in their fight against the enemy. Okay, I found this book. I actually found a book. I had this got this as a gift from my Bar Mitzvah. It's about tefillin. Just for something different, just for a couple of sessions about the halachas of tefillin.
Okay.
Nice. It's something that very practical. We all put tefillin on, and it seems very important to know. Okay, so it says here, why is the mitzvah of tefillin so important? It says when you bind the tefillin to your arm and lay them on your forehead, they remind you of the great miracles which Hashem performed for us when we left Egypt and became His people. The tefillin are particular marks which declare to the whole world that we are Jews, the army of Hashem. Just as on the 8th day of your life you were given a brit milah, now on becoming an adult, you again make a physical pact. This time by involving your heart and brain, which you lay your tefillin. That is your feelings and thoughts into your work for Hashem. Okay, just one or two questions before we'll only do. Let's just do one or two, then we'll continue next time. Okay, a question: how do these black square boxes symbolize this? And it says each of these boxes contains 4 excerpts from the Torah, which contain these precepts written on parchment by an expert sofer. These are written on 4 separate parchments and inserted into separate chambers into the shell rosh. That's the head tefillin, since the brain is the center of the 4 senses: sight, hearing, smell, and taste. Whereas in the tefillin, to be laid against the heart, they are written onto one single parchment, which is inserted into a single chamber, because the sense of touch belongs to the heart. So that's in the shell yad. Okay, then just one more. Which excerpts are written on the parchment, and why were they singled out from the whole Torah? These 4 excerpts bring the essentials of Judaism. The first one, Kadesh li kol bachor, sanctify me each firstborn, stresses the need to keep your thoughts pure and holy, and reminds us of the exodus from Egypt, which is the first step on our way to receiving the Torah and becoming Hashem's people. The second's V'haya ki yeviyacha, and when the time will come when you will be brought to the land, lets us know of the holiness of the Holy Land and the importance of keeping the mitzvot there. The third, which is Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, is acceptance of the kingship of Hashem over us. And the fourth, V'haya im shamo tishmo el mitzvotai, is, and when you will heed and observe my mitzvot. Okay, let's continue. I just thought something different, but it's halacha and it's practical. We can continue. Actually, another 2 sessions. This book was given to me as a bar mitzvah present by my bar mitzvah teacher in 1981, and this it's a few years old. Printed in 1974. So
amazing.
Well, it still has merit today.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin, that was unusual. I like that. It was nice. Something to know. All right.
Arthur looks like he's upside down, Damon.
No, that's his furry creature.
Creature, yes. Oh, there's the human we wanted. The humanoid we wanted to see.
Arthur, stop that.
Arthur.
I'm completely dizzy now. I have to leave the show. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, girl. All right. So if you remember, just very, very quickly, summary of what Rav's position was. Rav and Rabba both believed that despair affects acquisition on its own. Okay? Why? Mishnah said, Rav said they did not teach this in the Mishnah except with respect to where the second thief stole the stolen article prior to the original owner's despair, but after the original owner's despair, the first thief has acquired it, and the second thief pays the 2-fold payment to the first thief. Okay, it's just a quick summary. So the Gemara brings multiple challenges to Rav. First one is from Rav Sheshes, who said, I would state that Rav stated this law when he was drifting into sleep, otherwise he would never have stated it. For it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Akiva said, why did the Torah state that if the thief slaughtered or sold the stolen animal, he pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? because he became rooted in sin. Now, what do we mean rooted in sin? His sin has become strengthened because up until that point, the theft is not consummated. As the thief hasn't acquired the stolen article and it can be returned to the original owner. At the point where he sold it to another party where he no longer has control over it, or the slaughter is a physical change and he can no longer return the living animal, that itself effects acquisition and consummates the theft, and now it will never return to the original owner in its original state. That's Rashi's beautiful explanation. Now in what case, now in Rabbi Akiva's case, when it was sold by the thief, if he would say that he sold it prior to the owner's despair, is there then a rooting in sin that results from the sale? So what does it mean there? That does the thief selling the stolen animal prior to the owner's despair effect acquisition and consummate the theft? Certainly not, because it's not his to sell. Everybody knows that a change of domain from a thief's domain to the buyer's domain prior to the original owner's despair is not enough to effect an acquisition. A physical change, yes. Some even say perhaps a change of name in conjunction with other aspects, but certainly not just a change of domain without being bound with despair. Okay? So it's got to then refer to where the thief sold the animal after the original owner's despair. Does that make sense? And in that case, the owner's despair in conjunction with the subsequent change of domain from the thief's domain to the buyer's domain, because the thief's now sold it to another party, effects acquisition and consummates the theft. So Rashi explains that perfectly. And if it should enter your mind that despair alone affects acquisition, then why does he pay the fourfold or fivefold payment altogether? Because at the point where the owner despairs, the owner could have despaired way before the thief sold it to another party. We all agree that when a thief sells it to a buyer, his despair level goes up. But he could have despaired way before that. It could be months before. He waited for that stolen item. They call it a hot item because everybody's looking for it. So when Betsy the cow disappeared, they put these posters up saying, "Have you seen Betsy?" And when the memories faded and despair set in, he then could sell Betsy without incriminating law. It's like when somebody steals a painting. They wait a few years before the market calms down. Otherwise, every cop in the land would be looking for the person. So obviously, then the owner despairs. So if you want to say that despair affects acquisition on its own, in other words, guys, without a change of domain, without a physical change, without a name change, then why does he pay the fourfold, fivefold payment? Because at that point, you can say, okay, he pays the principal. And in the case of a principal, sometimes the twofold is connected to the principal, by the way, same pasuk. But not for the fourfold or fivefold, it's a different pasuk. So now, if Shimon took something from Levi and Levi gave up, then at that point, why should Shimon have to, when he sells it, pay the fourfold or fivefold? It's his animal he has to sell. The only thing he has to pay is the principal at the time of theft. And maybe that pasuk that talks about the twofold payment, the same pasuk, he shall pay twice, something along those lines, remember. But not the fourfold or fivefold payment. So it's a very good argument. So that's proof that despair doesn't affect acquisition according to the arguing opinion. So the Gemara now, it comes to Rav's defense, and they deflect the challenge. They say Rava said that in reply to a different challenge. Why is he paying the fold? It's simply because he became rooted in sin. Because what does it mean? He sinned repeatedly. Here too, with respect to the challenge, the brisa means that he sinned repeatedly. So what two different types of selling repeatedly are there? The one is if you slaughter the animal, it gives back the living animal. Not only did you sell it, but now you've rendered the animal dead and it can never come back, Betsy, in the living state that loved the animal in. And number two, when you sell it, the original owner is not going to get it back. It's one step removed and it's unlikely. So therefore, that's creating a double problem because it's difficult to undo that sort of damage. So either way, there's a problem. In other words, the brisa doesn't mean just that the Torah prescribes a fivefold penalties for slaughtering or selling the animal, because these acts effect acquisition and consummate the theft. by rendering it irreversible. Okay? Rather, the Brisa means to say that the Torah prescribes these penalties because the thief himself has become rooted in sin by sinning not once but twice. Once with his act of theft, the second time with his act of slaughter or selling the animal. And although the sale doesn't affect acquisition and consummate the theft, because the owner, because we necessarily see it from Rav's point of view that despair alone affects acquisition, the habitual nature of this thief is actually what affects the full fivefold payment. So he doesn't get out of it. Okay? So the Brisa may in fact refer to where the thief stole the animal prior to the original owner's despair, and therefore this Brisa in no way proves that despair alone does not affect acquisition. So we don't know either way. You could say that we don't get the person off the hook because you can't commit a sin and then get off your penalties, because otherwise everybody would be doing it. And the habitual nature of the sin is a problem. Okay, so now the Gemara presents another challenge to Rav's ruling that despair alone affects the thief's acquisition. So come learn a proof from the following Brisa. The verse states with respect to fourfold and fivefold payments. Where's that found, guys? If you want to look at it, it's Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 27. And basically states, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep, and he slaughters it or sells it. So in other words, just as the act of slaughtering stated in the verse refers to a slaughter that does not revert. Why doesn't it revert, guys? It's obvious.
But you can't change it back to an animal like that.
Correct. You can't resus bets if you chop their head off. Exactly it. I can't hear you, Kev. Kev, you're on mute.
No, your mark. There's a problem, Kevin. Your mark's on. You're not on mute, but there's a problem with your mark.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Hold on one sec.
Yes.
There, now we can hear you. It's fixed up.
Now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fine now. No.
Okay. What I try to find I've tried to look for, does revert back to the default position or revert back to the original owner? What does revert mean?
Okay, so what it means is that once you shoot somebody, you can't undo that sin in time because a person will never come back to life. So if you steal somebody's animal and you slaughter it, Betsy, the cow, ain't coming back to life. It's an irreversible decision. Now, we know that a buying decision is not irreversible because we learned with regards to liens. If somebody owes the world money and they sell part of their property that had a lien on it, and you owed it to another person, that sale is null and void. So it says that the buyer is to check from the deeds office that there are any liens on that property, because otherwise you'll learn out. You should find out before that's the case. Okay? So there's two opinions in regards to property liens. Remember that. The one is that a sale never took place. A sale never took place because you can't sell what you don't own. The other one is that it's a reversible sale. It's a reversible sale. What I'm saying is, if it's indebted to somebody else, it's not your property to sell. So they're saying here that slaughtering is a irreversible act. Selling something is not an irreversible act because you can always get it back from the buyer because it wasn't yours to sell. So that's the question that's coming up in the Gemara. Okay, it's just that simple, nothing more complicated than that. So it says, so to the act of selling. So they're saying just like a slaughter doesn't revert back, you can't undo it. So to the act of selling stated in the verse refers to a sale that does not revert. Now, how do you actually get that? The only way that you can get that is that if the original owner despairs. Because if the thief stole it and the original owner did not have Yush, despair, it does not ever revert to the thief. And therefore cannot sell what is not his. But if despair occurs and a change of domain from the thief to the buyer, in combination with despair, that sale is valid. So that's known as an irreversible sale. Just like a slaughter. So they're saying, just like you have a slaughtering that's irreversible, a sale must be irreversible, which means it cannot go back to the original owner. And the only way that that can take place is if the original owner despaired of having recovering his property or his animal or whatever was stolen when it sold to the buyer. So in other words, despair must occur from the original owner, then the thief acquires it, then a change of domain from the thief to the buyer, then the buyer acquires it, and it's an irreversible sale. So we're saying if that's the case, rather it must refer to where the thief sold the animal after the owner's original despair. And if it should enter your mind to say that the thief acquired the stolen animal through despair alone, then why does he pay the fourfold or fivefold payment altogether? Because it's his own animal he's slaughtering and his own animal he's selling. So it's saying a question, we've got a problem here. If we're saying that the original owner gave up hope, okay, then the thief has acquired it through the despair. So then why does he pay the fourfold or fivefold payment since the original owner gave it up before he sold it? So if he slaughtered or sold it, there's an eligibility for fourfold or fivefold payment. A buying decision would always revert back to the original owner unless despair kicked in. But if a despair kicked in, why would the original owner then have to pay a fourfold or fivefold? Because he now owns the animal. Why doesn't he just pay principal and maybe that twice, which is the twofold? So that's quite a clever argument. So again, we go back to Rav Sheshes and Rava about that principle about sinning repeatedly, according to their opinion, which means that if you've created such a difficult situation and you've not only stolen something, but you've profited from it, there's no ways that that you wouldn't. In other words, the fourfold and fivefold would kick in irrespective if there's despair. It's a punishment. It's a punishment for having sinned repeatedly. Okay? So the Gemara deflects the challenge and they say, look, it actually could be more complicated than that. Just going to wait for Gavin. I know he's got to sort something out.
I am, yeah. I'm just in the corner putting on plaster. I'm fine. Carry on. Sorry, I apologize.
Okay. No problem, Gav. So listen, so what's happening here is that the Gemara is deflecting the challenge. It says you don't even have to go with Rav and Rav Sheshes. It's stated by Rav Nachman in reply to a different challenge. When does the Brisa say that one is liable only for a sale that does not revert? It doesn't mean to exclude a sale that will revert because it's not legally binding. Meaning it's legally binding if the person has given up hope and it changes domain. Rather, it means to exclude a sale that has a time limit of 40 days or 30 days because it was stipulated on the contract. Here too, with respect to this challenge, you may answer that the Brisa means to exclude a sale that was only valid for 30 days. So what this is saying is that, listen, the fourfold and fivefold payment doesn't mean that the person doesn't the thief doesn't acquire through despair and the buyer through a change of domain. That sale is relevant. The reason the fourfold or fivefold payment, that's not a proof necessarily against despair effecting acquisition. The reason he pays the four or fivefold, according to Rav Sheshes, is it's an irreversible act and a core same as slaughtering. And as far as Rav is concerned, he sinned repeatedly by stealing and then selling something that wasn't his. What we're talking about here as a reversible act is that if the thief who sold the item to the buyer, the deal falls through for contractual breach, has nothing to do with despair effecting acquisition. It's a different issue. That's why the sale fell through, not because despair did not affect acquisition in combination with the change of domain. In fact, that would have solidified the thief owning it and being able to sell it to the buyer. It's because there was some contractual flaw where the seller who is the thief technically, did not fulfill his mandate. There was a off period or some contractual breakage and has nothing to do with the acquisition side. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, I just want to ask you something. Sorry, I lost sound for a bit. My speaker went off. Not now, a couple of minutes back. So I'm not sure if you answered it yet or you're still coming to it. What was the solution in the scenario where there's despair, nothing's happened to the animal, right? So you presume there's change of ownership, right? And what happens? So then, what's the reason for the 4-5 and the? How did you answer? How did that guy? Because you had a clever question. How did you answer that 4- and 5-fold payment story?
Well, firstly, it is a problem. It wasn't answered according to all opinions because that problem is still niggling. But the two answers proposed were the fact of it is there was a brisa by Rabbi Akiva who said it basically has to deal with the case of rooting in sin that results from the sale. So, in fact, it's not to say that despair doesn't affect acquisition, but that 4-fold, 5-fold payment, because it's rooted in sin, doesn't allow the person to then acquire it to the degree that they get off the payment because the animal is then theirs. In other words, it's basically like, Beis Shammai, that says that like if it's involved with sin, you don't get the fruits of your labor. You can't, for example, harlot make a contribution to the temple. So here it's saying, listen, you can't profit from your labor by saying, listen, I'm the thief, the original owner despaired, and it's a change of location, goes to the buyer, finders keepers, I've made a profit. What Rabbi Akiva says is if it's rooted in sin, you've damaged the original owner because you can never get back the animal because you've slaughtered it. In fact, it is a valid sale because of the despair. And in fact, that's the very reason you pay the 4 or 5-fold, because now the original owner's in a pickle. So you're going to pay for it because you think you're going to profit from sin. You're not. Okay? And as far as Rav Sheshes or Rava's got a similar view about sinning repeatedly. So that's the answer. It doesn't mean that despair combined with a change of location from the thief to the buyer doesn't affect acquisition. But that acquisition to the thief, that change of location in conjunction with despair that the original owner had with the thief cannot reward the thief. In other words, it acknowledges that it's not. In other words, the original question was, why would there be a 4-fold or 5-fold payment since the thief now owns it because there's despair? And the answer is because the thief cannot profit from the theft. So despite the fact that they own it and it's their animal to sell, which is true, the sale goes through. It does go through, unless there's a contractual flaw, which is what Rav Nachman said. But other than that, the sale does go through. The reason there's a 4-fold or 5-fold payment is not that despair doesn't affect acquisition in conjunction with a change of domain, where the buyer really does buy from the thief who had acquired it through the owner's despair. It's saying despite that, there's a 4-fold, 5-fold penalty for the repeated sin. But it acknowledges that, in fact, despair does affect acquisition.
But they never really become the pure owner. This is what I'm thinking, because one, it's from sin. Second of all, besides having to pay the 4-fold or 5-fold, even if that falls away, they still, regardless, they still have to pay the equivalent. If they've slaughtered the animal, they have to pay the equivalent. So they never really acquire ownership, because if you acquire ownership, you don't owe anybody anything. Okay,
so what Gavin's mentioning is, by the way, an excellent point in note 32. It's actually note 31 on page 67b3 in the Schottenstein. Okay, so what Gavin's talking about is legally you only consider the full-fledged owner of an article when it's yours and in your possession. In other words, you bought it from Macro and you can watch the TV and use it. But if it's not under your control and you can't use it, you technically don't own what you're not getting enjoyment from. That's number one, even if you bought it legitimately. So that is a good point. And the thief never bought it legitimately, so he's not the owner either. So both the original owner and the thief don't really own it. So Gavin's bringing up that point, which is excellent. But the reality is here, the concept of Yehush trumps. So that if the original if the thief waits for the original owner to despair. Now, the argument is that Rabba and Rav both say that despair alone affects acquisition. And many of the other opinions says despair alone does not affect acquisition. In other words, the thief doesn't get to own it, but if he sells it to another party, he can technically benefit because despair affects acquisition only in conjunction with the change of location, only in conjunction with the change of name or a physical change. Does that make sense? But Rav and Rabba saying despair alone affects acquisition, and the reason being is that a person is only entitled to it if, in other words, I'm the original owner. This is the thief. He's trying to take it from me, and in my mind, I haven't let go. The minute I let go and say take it, it's no longer. I've given up on it. It's no longer mine. That's the whole concept of Yush. It's a novelty. Which means legally, that's exactly the argument, is that how strong is that almost giving up? Because Gavin is saying that the thief never bought it legitimately. And that's why Rabbi Akiva and Rava is both agreeing with Gavin and say, yes, that's exactly why there's a fourfold or fivefold penalty. Because you can't be rewarded to force somebody to give something up. It's not like somebody... Yeah. Also,
can I just add something quickly?
Sure.
To me, based on my legal, it's not Torah, obviously, is that acquisition to me only takes place when, even if it's a thief, I would have thought acquisition of the thief would only take place when he's paid back what's owing. Whatever, if it's a penalty or if you have to pay back the proceeds, that's when acquisition should take place. I don't understand why acquisition takes place. I do understand it. I get it. I understand the Torah's view. I heard what you said, but it's quite tricky to really relate to it. That just through despair, all of a sudden now the thief acquires the animal and he can kind of do willy-nilly. I know he still pays the penalty and all of that.
No, Kevin's got a good point. And on your point, there's two issues that come up. There was one opinion that said Rabba holds in the case where the existing article is still extant, which means in existence, the thief has to return it. In all
That's
cases,
what I would have thought.
Yes, but by the time it's slaughtered, that's irreversible. The sale that goes to the buyer after there's Yush, despair, and a change of location, that's not reversible because the buyer now, we've got a problem, bought it legitimately. It was legit. It wasn't a thief taking it from a thief. Now he owns it. Now the thief is not off the hook, though, Gavin. He has to pay if it's a normal animal and not an ox or a sheep. If it's any other article or animal, he has to pay twofold. So the original owner really comes out good. Gets the original article back plus the same amount again in a penalty. Nobody gets away with anything here. You're 100% right.
Yeah, no, I can see that. That's
Yeah. So I know my stuff, but not without you pushing me to the brink of questions, which I love, because at the end of the day, it makes me research things, because I know you're going to, all of you guys have asked me things that are going to push it. And I appreciate that, because otherwise I can't get away with anything, which is good.
No, I'm not trying to make your life difficult tonight.
No,
Sorry,
you're not. I don't think you're making it difficult. And I think any argument you guys bring up, logic, and is an article that's worth pressing. You're not making my life difficult. You're making the Gemara real. So I don't see it as
it helps all of us. It's good for all of us.
What I wanted to say to you is that we've hit you with, like tonight, and I think the last couple of nights, we've had some good sessions. We've had a couple of tricky questions with you, and you've answered them very well, because they've been quite tricky. And I can say, well, I wouldn't like to be asked this question. I wouldn't like to be in your seat. And I must say, I know you're doing well, Damon, because you always used to sometimes say, listen, I need to get back to you on this or that. And now I think you're doing well. Well done.
Thank you.
Because it's hard to deal with those tricky questions. Not so easy.
Well, the thing of it is, when I don't know, I will say I'll get back to you, because the truth of it is, this is not something that a person should guess.
You can't make it up.
It's very difficult in Shemaim to be accountable for winging it for something of such value. And the fact that you guys thinking about these issues is something I really appreciate, and I don't see it as an irritant. Rather, I see it as essential.
All right. No, thank you.
Because
but I think you're doing
Damon,
a good job.
sorry.
And please keep it up. Don't. Sorry, Kevin, give me 1 second. Don't ever, like what you say, don't try wing it because it's pointless. But I'm saying you haven't been winging this. You've been very precise in your answers.
And
I know you're not.
you can't wing it because we're not talking about chickens and birds. Only live, yeah. But
listen, the only occasional bird you have is the turkey over here that can't answer it. But then I'll tell you I can't. And it's better for me to turn around and say, guys, I don't know, let me get back to you. Speak to Rabbi Cohen and get clarity than try and pretend. Because we're looking for real answers. And the times I've come back with Rabbi Cohen's answers were questions that were beyond my level of experience because Rabbi Cohen knows Shas backwards. And that context sometimes you need from elsewhere. How many times did we learn Sanhedrin where there were issues that came from Kedushin or Bava Kamma or other Gemaras? Many times. And there was stuff we learned in Bava Kamma that came also in turn from Kedushin, etc. So listen, although we've got 8 minutes left, I'm just trying to think that we're going to get into a whole another issue.
Yeah.
And I think we could actually leave it.
Before, I want to just make a comment to ask you on despair. It would be unfair if the original owner despaired of it and then the thief took ownership. It's like getting it. It doesn't seem fair anyway. It can't be. It doesn't sound right anyway. And imagine if the owner found out after he despaired, that the thief actually has it, he wouldn't be impressed. He wouldn't be charmed. It's it doesn't seem fair to the man in the street, so to speak.
You're 100% right. Sorry, Gav, you were going to say
a lot of people do want the original article back, which you raised, Damon. You did say that. Some people want the original cow for some reason. They've got great horses. They breed these horses. They don't want some schmucky horse. They want the original horse that they breed.
It took years and time and...
So that's exactly why there's many opinions that say Rabba and Rav were only saying if the article is no longer extant in existence, that despair affects acquisition, because that's why the person's despairing, because they heard that the article has been sold, broken, slaughtered, etc. That's why despair is kicked in. In other words, this case of slaughtering, it's not like there was despair and slaughter. At the point where he heard that Betsy ended up at Moishi's butchery, that's exactly the point at where despair kicked in. The problem is that despair kicked in after the sale. So technically, the question that the Gemara had, which was good, is that why is there a fourfold payment? And your answer to Gavin could be because despair only effected after the slaughter, not before, because he heard the news afterwards. He couldn't have had Ruach HaKodesh and heard it before. So therefore, he hadn't despaired at that point. Therefore, there could be a fourfold payment. It's just my answer. It's got no basis. In other words, how do you perceive that it's slaughtered? How do you give up? If you like Kevin and me or whatever, we've got hang-ups for 20, 30 years. That's what people have done to us. All of us have. So you haven't despaired, because otherwise it wouldn't niggle you. People that have stolen all sorts of things. So part of you having a hang-up is not saying, well, it's laissez-faire. It's you hear that it was slaughtered, or you hear it was sold to another party, then you despair of your back, and that's why the penalty can still be in existence, because despair came afterwards. It is an opinion, not just me. I did read somewhere that which came first, because we learned this when we were discussing biblically. Is it Deraisa or is it Derabonon about the thief? So we said, the Rabbi said, what order did it happen? The person had it stolen and then they despaired. They didn't despair and then have it stolen, because the thievery happened before the theft happened before the despair. The theft caused the despair, and therefore, since the theft caused the despair, it's not biblical.
Let's get back on keto, lads.
And it's only when the article doesn't exist anymore.
Keto for a while.
Arthur.
Yeah, sorry.
It's only when the article doesn't exist anymore that you have to pay the twofold payment, Kevin, because that's what Rabba is saying, is that it's not the case of a found article. Because look, in the case of a found article, the guy loses it, then you found it, you haven't done anything illegal, and you never caused him to lose it. So therefore, you legitimately got it. Okay? And even Rabba said that you should pay for it, by the way. The Rabbanim say you don't have to by law, but the right thing Rabba said is to do it. So therefore, of course, he holds that if it's not biblical, because what came first? The theft caused the despair. You stole it, and therefore the guy despaired. Not he despaired and then you stole it. So therefore, fourfold and fivefold or twofold payments still kick in. And the only reason that you pay a twofold or fourfold or fivefold payment is because the original article isn't in existence and it's allowing somebody to do teshuvah. Like when a beam is stolen from a house, you're not going to break down your house to get a beam. So therefore, you still want to make teshuvah. So if he gets a wooden beam, he's not going to be attached to it. But I agree with Gavin and Kevin is that in the case of an animal or something like family photographs, it's different. So Rabba does hold there when you can return the original article, do so. And that's why it's termed, Rabbi Akiva is saying, sinning repeatedly. Because now you've dashed the person's hope when you slaughter it, that you ever get it back in the original state, same as when you sell it to another party. You get what I'm saying?
Can I just mention another little view? It's just interesting. It's just a thought. Is that, in my humble opinion, again, I would actually say that the thief. Now, this is not halachic. This is just like this is the way I look at it. Is that the thief is really the owner when there's no despair, because when there's despair, you got the owner after you. When the owner doesn't despair, doesn't even know it's missing, you theoretically own that product because the owner doesn't know about it. I'm just saying, it's just food for thought, but it's not a lucky thing or anything. It's just an observation.
No, well, that observation is correct in one respect.
Yeah.
In that it's technically that's it, but that's exactly what Rabbi was saying. He was saying, listen, the owner despairs only after the thief started, because it's at that point where he realizes it's missing. And that's why it's not biblically allowed for the thief to keep it, because the missing article went before the owner despaired. But it's only at the point where he finds that it's missing do legal proceedings occur for an investigation. So, Gavin, you are right, but it's not that he owns it at that point. It's that the wheels of motion of justice and investigatory means have not kicked in at that point. He doesn't even know there's something that was stolen, and that's why biblically he can't own it, he's suggesting, Rabbi. And it could only be rabbinic as a method of teshuvah, because the theft happened before the despair. It's exactly a proof that he doesn't own it, because he caused the despair. It's not the person gave up on it first. Exactly. So that's exactly Rabbi's point. Exactly. All right, guys, I hope I've cleared some issues up.
Damon, before you finish, you were talking about...
The top room's a bit better. The top room's definitely a bit better. You in the top room